Hi class, welcome back. This is week 2, lesson 2.1. And as you've noticed already, this week is all about observing nature as a designer. I'm sure all of you have spent quite a bit of time in nature and observing nature, whether you're a bird watcher or you're a mountain biker or a gardener or even a cook, because that's of course part of nature. All of those things are fantastic, and we can get great joy and have great experiences in nature. One of the things, though, that we tend to do as humans is to separate ourselves somehow from nature. So we're learning about nature, we're going through nature, we're active in nature, but somehow we're like separated from or looking at nature, which is what all these pictures, some of them from my own family, are about. So we spend, and all those things are fantastic, and I encourage you to get out in any way you can, as much as possible, of course. To do biomimetic design, we need to take a different kind of look at nature. So while you're doing all these things, we can have some new experiences observing nature with a designer's eye. Actually, I shouldn't say designer's eye. What I want you to do actually is to use all of your senses. We do tend to rely really heavily on our eyes. And as kids, we learn we've got 5 senses. In addition to our sight, we've got smell and hearing and taste and touch, right? And we want to use all of those senses when we're observing nature as a designer. Not just that, we want to draw upon the many other senses we have. And some neurologists and psychologists said we've got far more than 5 senses. I forget how many there are. Maybe you guys can look that up. But things like sense of gravity. If you're sitting in a chair right now, you can feel gravity working on your body, right? So if you stand up, you feel it differently, and if you tilt off to the side, you feel it differently again. So when you're observing nature, notice things like your sense of gravity. If you're standing, even notice how it's different as you move your body around, how it feels different on your feet, depending on where you're walking and how you're standing. You might have a sense of adventure or sense of fear. That's what this picture is supposed to represent. And that's also important too, because we're going to be looking more and more at functions in nature and why things do what they do and how they do it. So there's not just the mechanical part, but also the dynamic part, which has to do with the ability to sense and respond. This is supposed to represent your sense of direction. How many of you right now can point to which direction north is? Do you know? It's actually a funny thing that many of us, some of us have a really good sense of direction and some of us don't. And it's a good thing to learn to develop, and I believe everyone can learn to develop a sense of direction. Okay, in addition to directions like north, south, east, and west, how many of you have a sense of where you are on the planet? So where you are in terms of latitude and longitude? So that's another thing you can be thinking about when you observe nature as a designer. Think where on the globe that you are, and where that bit of nature you're observing is on the globe. How about your sense of elevation? I'm in Seattle near sea level, but I used to live in the mountains quite high, and there's a very different experience at different elevations. So when you're observing nature as a designer, think about things like your sense of direction. This picture here is supposed to represent sense of security. So are you predator or prey? Are you safe? Are you unsafe? Are you comfortable? Are you feeling taken care of? Are you the parent or are you the child? You know, where are you in your social hierarchy? All those things are really important to what you are seeing in nature. And then let's not forget our sense of humor. As we go through nature with observing as a designer, you get to have all kinds of new joy, which releases that sense of humor, that sense of childhood play, which really helps with your skills of observing nature as a designer. One really interesting thing is to take away some of your senses. Primarily, if you take away your sense of sight, you'll find that you're much more sensitive to other things, and you'll notice things that you haven't noticed before, which is really key for biomimetic design. You'll find that as you begin to develop your skills of observing nature as a designer, you'll notice things you hadn't noticed before, whether it's just some dead, apparently dead stuff on a dead stick. Wow, suddenly you notice it's lichen, and why is it growing there, and how does it grow there? Instead of just looking at a flower, you might look much more closely at a flower and start to wonder, why are there so many petals on this flower and so few on others? You can experience nature with your whole body. So when you ask questions like, well, how does nature cushion? Why don't you go out and give it a go? See how nature cushions. And what about, how does nature deal with forces of compression and tension? Well, go out and maybe experience that with your own body. You might start to notice things from different perspectives and different scales. So instead of just looking at a mushroom, you might look underneath it. What was it like from a bug's perspective? And when the wind blows by a mushroom, how does it go over the top versus go underneath? And why is it shaped that way? And gosh, what are those little white spots in there? Are they spots? Are they bumps? What is that made of? And why are they that way? You may also find, as you develop your skills as an observer of nature, as a designer, that you'll be willing to touch things and feel things and explore things that once you might have found yucky. Instead of just noticing a pretty pattern, you may find hierarchies of patterns, things upon things upon things, forms upon shapes upon patterns. You might start to notice how water flows differently. Why does it bead up on some things and stick to others? You might find, instead of just asking what something is, you might say, why is that way? And how does it do what it does? You might start to notice interactions. Why is this seaweedy stuff this color and pattern up here? And why is this bacteria green, so bright orange in the seam? And why is the seaweed down here such a different color? And as you notice patterns, you might notice patterns that repeat themselves throughout nature, not just in one plant. You'll find things like the spiral pattern and repeating branching patterns all over nature. You'll start to notice those sorts of repeating patterns, and you have to ask yourself, why is it that way? What functions does that perform? And again, you get to be like a kid again when we start to observe nature as a designer. So like a kid, you start to notice all the cool things that your own body can do and what you can do when you work with others. Okay, so after you watch this little video, you're going to read this document called Get to Know Nature with some tips for how you can expand and deepen your skills of observing nature as a designer. And then I'm going to ask you to do your first BCI session. BCI standing for Be, Contemplate, and Imagine. And you get to actually do 3 of those this week, which is just great. From now on, you only get to do 1 every week. You can do as many as you want, of course, but for class, you just do 1. And the first thing you're going to do is find a spot in nature, close to where you work or live, where you can sit with your eyes closed, undisturbed, for about half an hour. This was my favorite spot when I used to live in North Wales. I used to go down to this, it's called the Menai Strait, and I would go down there all the time just for inspiration and take a little break. This particular picture I took, I went down there in the dark right before dawn and watched how it changed from nighttime to morning, and it was just gorgeous. And I hope you find a similar spot and get to experience it in all kinds of different weather and times of day and night. And one of the things I really hope for you is when you start to learn to observe nature as a designer, you find a whole new joy in experiencing and observing nature like this woman did. In fact, she is a designer, and this was on a biomimicry for design course in Veracruz, Mexico. So I hope you experience that very same joy that she is. All right, that's it for lesson 2.1 video, and I will see you in the next video.